Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to some. My name is Zakia Carr Johnson. I'm founder of Black Women Disrupt, an initiative we started here in Atlanta, Georgia in 2018 that was meant to bring together sister disruptors, Black women, entrepreneurs, and innovators across the Americas and throughout the African diaspora. We wanted to find ways to inspire one another, challenge one another, co-create together, and transform the societies in which we live. And when we met Dylan Valley and Antoinette Engel in 2019, we founded Black Women Disrupt the Web together. This experience has been a labor of love, and this series of master classes and panels that we're offering to this new community is something that we just can't explain, that has been tremendous and powerful. We want to thank our special guest for being here with us today, and we look forward to seeing more of you involved in our future events. Don't forget, we have a showcase in July, and we can't wait for you to be a part of it. Thank you so much for participating. See you soon.
Hey everybody, great for you to join us. My name is Dylan Valley and I am one of the co-founders of the project along with Zakia, who just spoke to you now, of Black Women Disrupt the Web. And today we have a very special talk, masterclass with Jabu, Nadia, Newman. But before we get into that, I'm just going to explain the interpretation for you quickly. We do have a Portuguese interpreter, Tainá, who's on the call. So if you require Portuguese interpretation, you can click, there's a toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can actually click on there's a little globe icon, you can click on that, and once you clicked on that, you can choose Portuguese for your Portuguese interpretation. So I'm going to hand over to Tainá to explain this to our viewers, our participants in Portuguese before getting to Jabu.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Para nós começarmos essa interpretação em português, você pode clicar na parte de baixo da sua tela, um ícone de globo, e clicando nele aparece a opção de português ou inglês. Caso queira me ouvir em português, é só selecionar português, ou se desejar o áudio original, é só selecionar áudio original. Para quem está no dispositivo móvel, é a mesma coisa, você vai clicar nos 3 pontinhos escrito mais, e vai escolher interpretação. Clicando em interpretação, você consegue o idioma em português ou inglês ou o áudio original. Muito obrigada. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tainá. So I'm going to introduce Jabu now. So Jabu Nadia Newman's work is as diverse as a constantly shifting pool of inspirations. This young filmmaker and photographer deftly explores a range of subject matter with sensitivity and humor, from the provocative to the pop culture-esque. Through her bold and colorful visuals, Jabu captures alternative stories unique to South African youth culture that are relevant to the here and now. Inspired by the Rhodes and Fees Must Fall movements, Jabu independently wrote and directed The Foxy Five, a web series that celebrates intersectional feminism through the antics of an empowered fictional girl gang. This creative hustle developed not only her career as a director, but also brought to light debates around sexism, feminism, racism, and inequality. Her honest narratives are engaging and relatable, encouraging her subjects to tell their own stories in their own way. Each project, whether it is an exhibition, branded content, music video, or commercial, is an exciting opportunity for disruptive, creative collaboration. Yes, The Foxy Five is one of my favorite web series of all time, so I'm very excited to welcome Jabu to Black Women Disrupt the Web for this masterclass.
Hi, Dylan, and hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and for inviting me to speak. I'm very, very honored and excited to be talking to a new school and a new people who are all interested in making web series. Yeah, I'm here to answer any questions, and I hope what I can say can just inspire and share some of what I did and how I was able to do it. So first, I'm just going to go through a presentation that kind of speaks a bit about the Foxy Five, the crew, the cast, the inspirations, and just about how it came about and what our main themes and intentions were. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Can everyone see that, Dylan? Is it good?
Yes, we can see that.
Perfect. So this is some of the cast and crew of the Foxy Five. We were 90% women and 80% Black women, and then women of color. And when we made the Foxy Five, besides it talking about this kind of like this subject matter, and besides making a show that was about Black women in South Africa, it was also important for it to be made by Black women in South Africa. So the biggest inspiration where it all really started was when I was studying and I learned about the Bechdel test. And this is a test that like Hollywood and industries use in film that sees whether films either have at least two female characters having a conversation between each other that has anything other than to do about men. So basically two women having a conversation that's not about a man. And when I looked at a lot of the media that I was watching and a lot of the movies or series, I found that majority of them didn't pass the test, which meant that most of the conversations were happening between men, and unless they were happening between a man and a woman. And if a woman and a woman were having a conversation, it was usually about a man. And this really upset me, and this really made me think about what I was watching and what I was engaging with, and how that was also affecting the way that maybe I would be telling stories or making films. So this was the biggest inspiration, was how do I create something that solely consists of the Bechdel test, meaning that it is a series that is only women having conversations about everything else other than men. And then I was thinking a lot about what it means to create work about women with having men in the crew, and this idea of a male gaze, whether it's through the cinematography, the editing, the writing, even the directing or the producing. It was important that there was a female component to that would shed light in a way that was so different, so that when we were writing or when we were shooting or when we were editing, a woman was having a say in that. She was behind kind of creating those edits, creating that lighting, creating the shots. And this really changed like the way we understood filmmaking, because for once we realized that we were making a film and the subject matter for women by women, which changed the way that we wrote the stories and changed the way that we worked with the actors and with just the way that we worked with the crew as well. So with all that in mind, now it was down to what is the subject matter. At this time, it was 2016 and it was the Fees Must Fall and Roads Must Fall protests. I was studying at the time, and I was studying politics, media, and film. So I became very involved with the protests, and I realized that so much of what the other women were speaking about and that I was learning about were really complex political terms and really complex ideas that I wasn't being taught while I was studying. And it was really interesting to find that there were these radical Black women who were telling me these things and teaching me these concepts. And I wanted to kind of find a way to capture this moment that we were sharing all of this knowledge in a way that felt like it was digestible, easy to understand, accessible, and able for someone who maybe wasn't studying, who maybe wasn't part of the protest at that time, to still engage with and hear what we were talking about. So thus became the Foxy Five. And the Foxy Five is a web series that follows the adventures of the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy smashing group of 5 young women from Cape Town. Each woman represents a different struggle and set of ideals within feminism. Despite their ideological differences and the clashes they often cause, the women are a tight-knit sisterhood that always manage to band together in overcoming the man. So with 5 characters, all based on friends of mine and people that I knew who were involved in the protest, I wanted to kind of give this idea that there were 5 different tropes that we could play around with. I think we have a question. Oh. Someone put their hand up. Okay, it's fine. Am I going too fast?
I think you're going fine. Taina, are you are you keeping up with the translations? Okay, you're fine. You're good. You're good.
Okay, awesome. So also at this time, I was feeling like I wasn't seeing a like real or truthful representation of a Black South African woman in the media. And especially looking at my generation at that time, it felt like we were becoming part of that women in Africa who wanted to be called feminists and who wanted to call themselves feminists, but we weren't being represented. And I wanted to find a way to kind of do that. And I thought 5 women might be able to represent one of us in real life. And so then I kind of took this idea of like, let's say 5 women or 5 feminists and what the different tropes that feminism is. So also looking at ideas of how the media has portrayed feminism, whether it's in a funny or negative light, but using that as a trope for people to immediately connect with each character, but then show that there are nuances and complexities to those ideas. So we had 5 women. We had Unity Bond, Women We, Femme Fatale, Black Beauty, and Prolly Plebs. And they all came together to be the Foxy Five. Each episode focuses on one character and highlights issues that character in particular must face and overcome. The issues complement the specific personality each woman possess. Because the Foxy Five are very different characters with strong personalities, viewers are able to identify themselves in each member. So it was important that with each episode, we were looking at one character and looking at her story, and then also talking about a current issue that was happening at that time. And because it was such a politically charged time, it was quite easy to have subject matter to talk about each week. And the way that it was made was really week by week. We would kind of get together in the first week of the month, like workshop some stories, come up with ideas. I would spend the next week or so writing it. We would get back, and most of the times that I would present the script to the cast, because the cast were in the movement themselves, they always had changes and always had things that they particularly wanted to talk about and was important to them. So then it was kind of like up until we were shooting, the script was changing to fit the narrative that we were experiencing at that moment. And obviously this was all about intersectional feminism and how we were trying to learn and understand that ourselves, but also trying to find ways to just explain it or describe it. We found it quite difficult to describe it, so we try to describe it in many different ways. but intersectional feminism. So if feminism is advocating for women's rights and equality between the sexes, intersectional feminism is the understanding of how women's overlapping identities, including race, class, ethnicity, religion, and sexual orientation, impact the way they experience oppression and discrimination. So that's why it was so important for it not just to be one woman that we were following in this web series, but 5 women who came from different backgrounds, different identities, different religion or sexual orientation, and find how they deal with oppression and discrimination on a day-to-day because of those different identities.
Jabu, I've got a question if you don't mind.
Of course.
Because we spoke about this kind of thing before, and I just want to know if you could say a little bit about how the nature of the protests during Fees Must Fall, right? Since you were like there on the ground, you know, I've read a lot about how initially there was this very intersectional kind of movement. You know, it felt like it was, you know, women were leading, queer people were leading. And could you say a little bit about that, and also how it also influenced the web series?
Definitely. I think that what's really exciting and interesting about decolonization and the idea of decolonization is also within that breaking ideas of patriarchy and heteronormativity, which comes from colonization. And that was really important in the movement and in the protest, because there was this understanding that women need to be at the front, and women need to be at the front line, pushing these ideas and talking about decolonization, because having women there and having Black women at the front was inherent to decolonization. And that was really, really amazing and inspiring to see, because before I had always had like male lecturers talking to me about politics and talking to me about revolutions and talking to me about, you know, radicalism, or about, just about different movements. And then when we were in this space where it's a whole lot of students who have occupied a hall in the university, and now a woman is standing up and speaking to us and talking to us about these things, that felt like, it felt so different, and it felt so true, and it felt so inspiring, and it made other people realize that this was the way forward. I think that there's always that like initial idea and that initial dream, and it was like that for the moment, but I think now more than ever, there's still the need to like carry on and to pass that baton on to other women. Like we still have to stand up and fight and try to be at the front to talk about these things. And I guess that's what Black women disrupt the web are doing. So big ups to you guys. So going into the characters and how they represented the different sections of intersectional feminism, Black Beauty dealt with race. So one of her lines was, when introducing her character, it was like, Black Beauty dreams about marrying Malcolm X while having an affair with Steve Biko. And then we had someone like Femme Fatale, who was our queer, sexually fluid feminist, who was talking to us about self-love and everything. And then we had Prolly Plebs, which was all about class, and was kind of the person who looked directly at class division, but also was someone who was like the positive feminist. And then we had Women We, who dealt a lot with gender and mental illness as well. And then there was Unity Bond, who was the leader of the group, who kind of kept it all together. So with these different characters, like, we also tried to play a bit on these tropes or stereotypes that was about feminists. So like Femme Fatale is like, oh, you know, feminists are just like sluts who want to have sex or whatever. Or like the stereotype that, oh, feminists are like these airy fairy, like peace loving girls. Or women who was like the studious character, or like feminists are just like bookish or whatever. So it was kind of trying to take those tropes and turning it on its head. I think I did this because at the time that I was studying, one of the things we were learning was that like stereotypes are used so much in media because it's easy for an audience to identify with a character that way. Like when you have a character who is stereotyped, you immediately know this character because you recognize it from other shows. So we tried to use that and then turn it on its head to show that all of these women who have their own issues that they're focused on or that they're fighting for, they also have so much more complexities and internal issues that as a group they deal with. Yeah, so the characters deal with a multitude of issues ranging from mental illness, gender politics, and shifting identities to sexual harassment, colorism, and financial strain. We watch how the Foxy Five, with a slew of outside pressures affecting their personal relationships, must grow and learn together through overcoming strife. By the season finale, however, we realize that the strain of these everyday struggles have taken a toll on the group, and for one character in particular. The audience is left wondering if the group will be able to reconnect and come together for a second season. So although the overall theme was how these women were dealing with everyday structural oppressions and patriarchy in their world and in their lives, it was also a lot about how we as women discuss that among each other, how we support each other, and how we learn from each other and share those ideas, and how we're able to argue and have different opinions, but how we're still trying to find a way to support each other and be there for each other. Yeah, and I think that was one of the most interesting things, was being in a crew. And I mean, we were a crew for about a year long, where every 1 to 2 months we came together to do an episode. And it's kind of like a family. And when you're a family who is, first of all, dealing with the subject matter in real life and then acting it out for the show, it was really interesting to see how much just the fact that we were a woman crew made it possible, because we were there to give support and to help each other talk about really intense issues that we were dealing with at that moment. Yeah, so that's just more about diversity on set and how important I realized that was, and how much that does affect the storytelling and whose stories and what stories you're trying to tell. And yeah, and I know that one of the questions was talking a bit about distribution and reception. And I think what worked so well for the Foxy Five was that, first of all, it was dealing with very, very relevant subject matter, where you could read an article like that month about the protests or about something happening or about an incident, and we would try to then put that into our story and have the women discuss it and talk about it in a way that women in South Africa were having those conversations between themselves. So it was almost like you're getting this direct insight into what Black women are talking about, what they're feeling about current political issues at that moment. And because a lot of the women that were in it were involved in the protests or were themselves political, we wanted to share it a lot. And it just grew because it was like a family of people who shared this content, and then this content related and spoke to many other people who were either going through the same things or talking about the same things. And it made it feel like a very organic and authentic conversation between women in South Africa, where we would have a screening. And even though people had watched the series at YouTube, they would come to the screening because they would want to discuss it, because they would want to talk about what they thought and what they went through, or how they felt about the show, or whether they liked it or not. because they felt like they had agency now because they're seeing women who are like them, and they're talking about stories about them. Therefore, they have the agency to discuss it and like critique it as well. Yeah, and that's the end. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and if you have any questions, now is the time.
Thank you so much, Jabu. That was great. It's really great to hear you talk about the project and kind of explain how it was put together and the thoughts behind it. I've watched the Foxy Five so many times, so it's really lovely to hear you talk about it. And yes, we're opening it up for questions now. I've got a few that I've got so many, you know, but I'm gonna try and limit my questions so we have questions from others. But I think my first question for you is, I mean, the Foxy Five is this great kind of, you know, decolonial project, intersectional feminism. People have called it a web series about intersectionality and all these things. And I really wanted to ask you, you know, why did you decide to make the Foxy Five as a web series in particular, and not as, say, like a short film or pitch it as a TV series to, I don't know, like Multi-Choice, ETV, SABC. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think at the time I was engaging with so much media on the internet, and I was watching so many, whether it was blogs or like disclaimers or explainers, that I found like the internet was kind of also I mean, it's not entirely decolonial or like accessible to everyone, but there was a feeling of more accessibility to it. And also at the time, it was such an interesting medium because it was so immediate with your audience. And because we were kind of writing the scripts after we were shooting each episode, we could immediately, after one episode, we could see how the audience were reacting to that episode, what their comments were, what they were talking about certain characters, you know, whether they liked it or not. And we could immediately respond to that and think about it for our next episode. And that's why there's so much, like when you watch the Foxy Five from the beginning to the end, it feels like there's so much growth within just like even the storytelling or the filmmaking. And that simply came from like having immediate access to our audience to see how they were engaging with the work, and yeah, whether it was working or not. And I guess at that time I didn't think I could pitch it anywhere. I was like the first thing I'd ever made, and yeah, it just felt less daunting to put it on the internet because it felt like the internet was a place to try things out and test things out, and people were a bit more forgiving, you know, on the internet than they would be, say, on a TV show. Or yeah.
Do you still feel like the internet is that place? Do you still feel it is as forgiving now? I mean, now I guess it's 5 years later, right, since Foxy Five was made. What do you how do you see that? Is there a shift now on the internet?
I think that now, because there are things like Netflix and Showmax and even YouTube Create and everything, there is a lot more production value and a lot more expectation going into making work, even if it just lives on the internet, because now that is considered like a viable distribution plan and a viable space to release work, and you can get money from doing that. But I also think that story always trumps like production value, because you can watch something a million times if the story's good, even if the footage is grainy or whatever, because that's kind of more important. And I think that as much as there is content and so much content, people are still hungry for really, really good content. So if you make something good and something interesting, people will be drawn to it because they're watching a lot of stuff that they may not be drawn to. I see D Marco has their hand up.
Yes, D. D is my supervisor, by the way.
Hi.
Hi, Dylan.
Hey, D.
Hi. I wanted, can I go ahead? Is it okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, I'm not sure why.
Go ahead.
Can you hear us now?
Cool. Yes, I can. Sorry, that was actually my bad. Jabu, thank you for such a wonderful web series. Dylan introduced me to this web series a few years ago, and I have pretty much taught it every year since in my honors course in media studies at WITS, and half of my honors class is listening to you here tonight.
Hey guys.
So yeah. Yeah, it's really wonderful to hear you speak about this incredibly important piece of work that you've done. My questions, I have so many questions for you, but just for kicks, where could we imagine with you? Where are the women who we get to know in the web series now? Just as an imaginative exercise, where might they be, considering what we know and how we have grown into intersectional feminism, within the 5 years since you created the work. And secondly, I'm quite curious about your use of the kind of Blaxploitation 70s aesthetic. And I'd love to know a little bit more about why. And I mean, I think it's done so beautifully and very playfully. And I think that there's a lot that could go kind of unseen, but in other words, I don't think it has to register as an absolutely crucial element to the web series in watching it, but I think it also could. And so I would love to just hear you say a bit more about that. And again, just thank you, Jabu, and congratulations on such a really interesting and meaningful piece of work that I hope just set the tone for what we will see from you in the future.
Thank you so much for your questions and your kind words and teaching the Foxy 5. That's very, very cool. I'm so honored. That's so cool. It's quite an interesting thing to think about where those characters would be now. I think that, just looking at where some of the real people in the crew are, one is on The Bachelorette looking for love, and another one is in politics.
Wow. Sorry, I had to add that. Just wow. Okay.
One is like part of a political party. I could imagine one being a mother and having children. I think it's kind of just like now more than ever, I think that the idea of like feminism and intersectional feminism is kind of the idea that whatever a woman's choice or what she chooses to do in her life is her choice, and we have to respect that. And therefore it's kind of like wherever they would have landed, they would be. I honestly haven't really thought about that, but yeah, it's interesting. A lot of them are creatives and a lot of them are still involved with film and media and politics and art. A lot of them are involved with art. So yeah. And then about the Blaxploitation theme, which was kind of a big deal, was, I guess it was this idea of playing on a genre. And the reason why I chose that genre was because at that time I was watching a lot of Blaxploitation films that were from the like 70s, and films about like from Pam Grier, whether it's like Coffee or, Foxy Brown or all of those different ones. And it was really, really surprising to me to see that there were these strong Black women characters who were like in badass action films, taking up space. And it was kind of surprising to me that that existed at that time when it was still such a racially charged period in America. And for me, that was just like so inspiring that there was this movement of film that embraced that and encouraged that. And I wanted to pay homage to that in a way that was also kind of like playing a bit on the genre and having fun with the aesthetics, and then, yeah, setting it in a world where it's reminiscent of that time. Like we're also still going through like, a lot of racism and like inequality in South Africa. And we need to kind of like have these characters and these larger than life characters who are going to like kick down the door and like walk on UCT with like guns or something, So yeah, it was kind of playing into that fantasy as well.
Sure. Cool. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
And thank you, Dee, for those great questions. Really lovely questions.
Sure.
And for everyone else in the call, remember you can either put your hand up in the call on the Zoom function. I think there's like a raise hand function, or you could type your question in the chat, or you could just unmute and ask the question if you'd like. I've got another question which kind of relates to that, but specifically actually around decoloniality and thinking about decolonization. And for me, web series are kind of like a decolonial project in and of themselves, because of the way, like, so the way you were describing kind of, having the freedom to do what you want. You were, in a way, film and TV is so controlled, and in a sense, the internet itself is colonized. So, there's these academics who write about data colonialism and how basically Facebook, Google, these big tech companies, they basically control the internet in a sense, right? So in a way, web series are not only just kind of a way to overcome television gatekeepers and film and television, so like not having to deal with them or like sidestep them, but also in a way the internet itself, right? So like, because now we, like, I think back to like in 2016, I don't think the public was as aware of the ways in which like these big tech companies are tracking us, controlling us, trying to influence us in different ways through suggesting ads, and trying to change our behavior. It goes quite deep into AI and things like that. But I feel like you were saying, like Black women, I think you used the term taking up space, like they did with Blaxploitation, is really important, right, for the internet in terms of decolonization, but also the ways of working, right? So there was an episode, you spoke earlier about how you would kind of take suggestions, or you would workshop the script with the cast, right? And I remember in one of the episodes, which was, I think it was Lebo, Femme Fatale and Lebo, episode 4, where Lebo, who's a trans character, basically speaks back to the crew, right? And basically the last few minutes of that episode is Lebo kind of, like addressing the Foxy Five as a group and saying, you guys don't get it. Like you invited me to be part of the Foxy Five. Well, I'm here in the, in your clubhouse, as they call it, as in the episode. And Lebo says, like, I'm tired of this clubhouse because actually you guys just don't get it. You don't understand what it is to be trans. And I remember watching that, and it really, I think I was watching it with Antoinette, my partner, and I was just like, wow, like I feel like I just really got schooled. Like I felt like they were addressing me as well, because I was like, wow, I don't get it actually. I thought I got it. I'm like, cool, and I'm down with it, and I'm watching the Foxy Five. But actually, I'm like, oh, I don't actually get it yet. You know, there's work to be done. And I know I'm saying a lot here, so I'm like kind of, you know, giving my analysis of it and everything. But I just wanted to know if you could say a little bit about that. You know, that kind of a process where you gave Lebo like, you know, the entire end of the episode was theirs, where also Lebo was not only delivering their own written monologue, but also criticizing the Foxy Five, and by extension, like the show as well. And you put that in there, right? So I just want to know if you could say a little bit about that, because I found that was like one of the most exciting episodes of anything that I've seen ever. So yeah, could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so interesting how that has been so many people's favorite episode, because it just felt so real and it took such a different turn where it was like, wow, I didn't expect this. It was interesting because, you know, for me and with the group that we were, none of us were trans, and therefore writing for a trans character felt very wrong and very hard to do. And there was the trans collective that was also a part of the Fees Must Fall protests. And then we kind of decided we wanted to team up with them and do an episode that was, you know, focused around these issues. And Lebo, who is played by a friend of mine, they were really interested in engaging with it in that way. And the kind of end dialogue, it was interesting because they were always supposed to write the end monologue, but they never showed it to us. And they were kind of like, and they were kind of like, you know, I'm gonna speak my truth and I'm gonna like say some stuff that you might not be happy to hear. And it was like, no, that's cool, that's fine. Like, this is the time and the space to do it. Like, we have to address this stuff. And they didn't want to do it before because it would have felt like then they were kind of acting it out and like putting it on, rather than just saying it in that moment at that time, what they were really feeling. So it was kind of like at that moment, what the audience was feeling, the whole crew and the cast were feeling too. And it was really powerful. And I was really grateful that you know, Lebo was able to do that and was able to share that with that, because we also needed that as a moment to step back and be like, great, we're doing what we can and we're speaking about issues that we know about, but there are also other women, other trans women, other non-binary people who don't feel included in these conversations and who have their own experiences. Yeah, and so many people responded to that in like such a positive way, which was really, really cool. And it felt like, yeah, that needs to happen more when people are able to disrupt spaces that they're not included in. You know, this was like a Black, but like a cis woman crew, and then a trans woman came in and disrupted that space. It just like, it opens us up to things that we weren't aware of and that we also need to, yeah, learn and understand and unpack. So, yeah.
I think that's a great teachable moment for anyone who's working in television, or you know, like in traditional television or mainstream television or film, is to kind of go, because there's so much control, right? It's like these very hierarchical structures, and there's ways of working which work for a certain reason or for a certain outcome. So I'm not totally discounting those ways of working, but the fact that so many people responded so strongly, it just shows that by allowing that openness to actually listen, instead of saying, well, this is the script, you know, you can't really like, great that you've written this monologue, but we kind of spent a lot of time working out the script, so we can't change it now, which is kind of like how it normally works. You created one of the most powerful episodes, you know, so I think that's a really great lesson for television. And I think, like you said earlier, you know, these streaming sites like Netflix and Showmax, I think they have they have actually learned some of these lessons, because when you hear people talking about working with Netflix, they often say things like, it's great because we have so much more control than we'd normally have. And I think it's because people have learned these lessons from people like yourself, who are making web series and allowed for way more creative freedom instead of trying to fit things into formats and boxes that have worked before in the past, and mold things into that way. So I think, people are learning the lesson.
Yeah, I mean, it's also so interesting to see how, with a lot of shows, like they say things like chewing gum, or even like, Issa Rae's Awkward Black Girl, or even like Lampen, which is this new thing on Netflix. They all started out as web series, and I think that shows like even High Maintenance and networks like Netflix and HBO and Showmax, all of those places, they're realizing that, if they're not going to like trust creators are going to make it themselves, and then someone else is, and they're going to build their audience, and they're going to connect with their audience and build their show and their brand, and then you're going to hop on it later. And now it's kind of like they need to realize that, and they are starting to realize that more alternative storytelling and that format of whether it being a web series or not is speaking to people more, and they're open to it more than it's something being like a 24 genre episode, that carries on for like 5 seasons and is like a serial or whatever. So it's interesting to see. And I think that, when creators do put stuff on the internet and do put stuff on that web, it's kind of like opening up that pool of like, what is content that could be made and could be chosen by a network, because you could pitch something to Netflix and they could say no to it. But if you make it and if it's successful, then they'll come back to you. So it's kind of like also, like opening those channels more and like taking those gatekeeping away.
Yeah, totally. I also wanted to touch on a question that Dee had earlier, which was around kind of this playfulness of the way you use blaxploitation. There's also, you engage with that as a genre in the Foxy Five, but there's also there's kind of like a playing around with different genres. So, and I remember I spoke to you once about that, and you said something to the effect of you weren't really interested in trying to make a comedy or a drama or anything like that. You were just writing, and you were just letting it come to you as it were, right? Could you say a little bit about that choice? Because usually we think about, when we start to write, we think about, okay, I really want to do a comedy. And a lot of web series, I think a lot of times when we think about web series, we think about comedy, like straight up comedy. And so could you say a little bit about that choice? Why did you choose not to think about genre at all? And what genre do you think you came out with, right?
Yeah, I think the genre was an ensemble cast. That was the genre, or like the style. And then it was almost like each, dependent on each character, was like a different genre almost. And I don't write comedy, but naturally, like I feel like naturally South Africans are very comedic. And when these characters were kind of playing themselves and putting their own flavor into it, it was just naturally comedic. So it came more of a natural thing, where I was more writing like drama, like there's an issue in the beginning and it needs to get resolved at the end, and then bringing it to them and seeing what like flavor they would bring to it, what parts of they would bring to it, or their character, just in a way broke those genres and made it into a comedy as well. And I think it helped that it just came from them, because it was kind of like their jokes they would make with each other naturally in like just conversations, and it worked because then it was also still very like relevant to the types of jokes and the types of language that we were using as like a generation at that time. But yeah, the genre was definitely like ensemble cast, focusing on one character and focusing on a drama with comedic moments in between.
So like, I also have a question. Oh, I have a follow-up question to that, but I see Antoinette has written something. Antoinette's question is, thanks Jabu for this. I'd love to know how you navigated professional opportunities that came after Foxy 5. Did the success of the series put you in position to pick and choose what work you took on afterwards?
Cool, very cool question. I think after the Foxy 5, I had kind of no idea what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. I knew I still wanted to be in film and I wanted to make narrative work. And I thought that I wanted to make another web series, and I wasn't really sure. And in South Africa, the options were kind of like, you can go into commercials or you can go into like TV and radio or series. I mean, TV and radio or films. And it was kind of like, Johannesburg is where the TV series are. You could get onto a set where you're working like a 9 to 5. And then Cape Town was like the commercial space. And it was interesting because at that time, the commercial space was super interested in me and in the work, and was kind of like talking about how to bring the Foxy 5 into a commercial space, or like using that filmmaking. And I was kind of like, what? I mean, I have no idea what South African commercials are even like these days, but I don't think they're that political yet. But it was kind of that way of trying to do comedy with talking about very serious situations, which South Africans do really well. And I guess I tried that out for a while, but then I found that things like short films and documentaries just came more to me. And even though lots of work have come from the Foxy 5, it's still like, as an independent filmmaker, you have to make those opportunities yourself. You have to apply for funding. You have to use all your time off to write and create new stories that you then push to get funding for, to still make your own work while you're doing other work for money. But it's honestly been such a blessing to see how something you could make, one of your first things that you can make as a web series, it can propel you into the industry, because no matter what level you're at, when you make your web series, people get insight into your storytelling, and that's what people care about the most, is what stories you tell and how you tell it.
Thank you. Thanks, Antoinette, for that question, and thanks, Jabu, for that answer. I actually remember when I think Vodacom approached you to be in an ad, right? I think you were in a Vodacom ad where you spoke about the Fox 5. I think it's interesting what you're saying in terms of like the commercial industry, which a lot of our creatives end up working in there, to make a living, and how to kind of take these ideas and have them fit inside of these kind of and I think, but I think with your case, there are, you're showing there are options for that. And it's also interesting how, you've kind of, for me, you've kind of positioned yourself now as an artist, like I kind of see you as an artist, as a filmmaker, but also as an artist, right? And because you've done work and you've done exhibitions, you've shown work at galleries. And I think it's really an exciting example for showing filmmakers or people who are interested in making films, that you don't have to, there's no one way to do it, right? And there's a way to have your own voice. And like Dee said, you made something so important, and it was, like you said, the first thing you've ever made, but it has such resonance now, and it kind of exists almost as an archive of that time, of the things that were going on at the time, as like kind of a document of what students were talking about and what they were preoccupied with, and the complexity of that time as well. You have these 5 different women. It wasn't one kind of idea of what the student the student activists were like. So I think it's almost time for us to wrap up. So the last thing I want to ask you is if, and this is one of those very like, generic journalist questions for for filmmakers, but if there was someone listening to this who's interested in making a web series themselves, if they have an idea that they really want to get off their chests, and they want to write it down, how would you kind of advise that they start that journey? Also thinking about web series now, but also beyond web series, what other options are there? What do you think if for somebody who just would love to write something and make something like the Foxy Five?
Yeah, it's super, super interesting. And I think I remember starting out and just kind of like writing down very basic themes and very basic ideas and kind of just like the overall idea. And then I approached people I was studying with and people I were friends with and built it from there. And I think that's kind of the most important thing is if you are wanting to make a web series and you have a character in mind, find that person who's going to play that character and work from there, and then involve them and then build it together, because filmmaking is such it's a group sport. And unless you're going to do it all yourself, which is also cool, and if you can, that's amazing, but definitely find people who also like believe in the story and want to be a part of the team, and then kind of just like shoot on anything you have. Like someone told me, I remember reading a quote or something that said, the best camera in the world is the one that you have. So whichever camera you have access to, use that camera. Like don't hold yourself back waiting for, more money or something. Just kind of make your idea first and work from there. With the Foxy Five, I think like we raised like a little bit of money and we made the first episode, and we were kind of like, we're spending all the money on the first episode and whatever happens, happens, but we want to see how the first one works. And after that, because people were into it, we literally sold our clothes and hosted parties to raise money for each episode, and then started a crowdfunding. So it's kind of like doing everything that you can just to make at least one piece that you can show and then build from there. Yeah. And like, if your best camera is your iPhone, use your iPhone. iPhones are kind of, cell phone cameras are kind of amazing right now. So yeah.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much, Jabu, for this. Very inspired, and I'm sure everyone else is as well. And yeah, I hope you continue. I hope you do make another web series, so we have something to to watch soon. And where can we follow your work so that we can see what you're up to next?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really, really cool. My work, you can follow me on Vimeo, which is just vimeo.com/Jabu Newman. And then on Instagram, again, just Jabu Newman. And yeah. And then the Foxy Five is just the Foxy Five TV on YouTube.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much again. And thanks to everyone who came, who participated, asked questions. And thanks once again to the team of Black Women Disrupt the Web, Antoinette, Taina, our interpreter, Lakeisha, and Tara, also on this call. And thanks to everybody who came through. And please check out our social media as well. Follow us. If you look up Black Women Disrupt the Web on Instagram, you will find all our other events, and be on the lookout for the web series that we have been commissioning as well. So there's 5 web series that Black Women Disrupt the Web have commissioned by 5 Black women in 4 different countries. So be on the lookout for that as well. And We hope you'll enjoy that as much as we enjoyed the Foxy 5. And be safe, take care of yourselves, and have a good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Bye.
Dylan. Thank you, Black women.